Now, Richard was not alone in Iraq in August of last year when the last combat troops were leaving. Rachel was reporting from there, too. And tonight she's about to be a guest on the Bill Maher Show, so she can't be here to host her own show. But we're still able to talk with her by phone about this moment. Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening, Melissa. Thank you for having me on the Rachel Maddow Show. I feel like it's sort of a looking glass thing, but it's great to be able to be on the show.
Well, you know, you can always be a guest on my guest hosting of your show. But listen, back in 2005 and 2006, when Americans were in the streets pushing back against this war, did you imagine that this is how it would end with a security agreement, with this kind of a slow, movement out, this immunity, denial of immunity by the Iraqi government? Does American protesting about our own international entanglements matter at all?
It is. I think that the most I could have foreseen, the most I could have imagined, was that the American people would elect a Democratic president who was opposed to the war, and that would be the person overseeing the end of it. I think that protest movements and the in-the-street kind of protest that we have about wars, and that we certainly had about the Iraq War, it has an indefinite and indirect effect on our politics. It creates a sense of crisis around which politicians must pick sides. And, right now, just looking at the reaction, partisan political reaction to what President Obama announced today, it's a reminder about why it is really important that we have politics about these things. Every single one of the Republican presidential candidates, except for Ron Paul, has reacted to this by saying, you know what, I wish the Iraq War was going on longer. Yeah. And that is a really important thing for Americans to remember about our politics right now. One of the choices that we have to make is whether or not we want to stay with President Obama or whether we want to pick somebody instead who looks at the Iraq War situation and thinks, man, if only that were going on longer and weren't ending, America would be so much better off.
Well, and look, you're talking here about the question of protest, and right now in the streets, right here in New York City, right, Americans are protesting on the questions of economic inequality. We have 40,000 troops coming home, 40,000. And the unemployment rate for veterans in this country is outrageously high. On the one hand, Richard and I are sitting here thrilled about the possibilities about what it may mean for this war to be ending. On the other hand, what do you see as the domestic economic implications of this return of our veterans to such a poor economy?
It's interesting. We did have earlier this week the president and actually the first lady announcing a major private-public partnership that was essentially a hiring program for new veterans. Part of the American Jobs Act that the president has proposed would be not just a tax credit, but sort of a mega tax credit to private businesses who would be willing to hire veterans and even disabled veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. And so we have actually seen some focus on that, on the disturbingly high levels of unemployment among Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. Looking at it more broadly, I mean, the whole country has an unemployment problem. And one of the problems that we've got is that even when jobs are available, we do not necessarily have some of the skills as an American workforce to fill the jobs that are available. And part of that is the way that jobs are distributed and urban versus rural things. But we have to look at the 2 million Americans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan as an incredible repository of experience, expertise, and a real American leadership. I mean, I do not know a more impressive group of my peers, people in my age group and the 10 years younger than me, than people who have served in Iraq and Afghanistan. That professional experience sets them up uniquely, I think, in our age group cohort for taking jobs that other people don't necessarily have the skills for in America. I think it's an eminently employable group of people. I think the administration is focused well on it. And I think that our nation's veterans are a really, really, really impressive group. We're going to have to rise to the occasion to meet the promises that we've made to them. Sure. But mostly we should be looking to them for leadership on all sorts of things in this country because they are the best that the country has to offer.
And we've leaned on them in a way that hasn't been true in previous wars, where such a small group of people have carried really all of the sacrifices. In fact, we were asked as a country not to sacrifice, to go out and shop in the context of our colleagues and our peers doing this work. Now, speaking of Iraq winding down, Afghanistan, the president tells us, is also going to be winding down. NATO is going to be ending its operations in Libya as well. Is this time for us to be having a conversation about how and when we go to war? Is this a moment? Are we going to start to enter a period of peace when we could actually engage in some thoughtful conversation about war?
Yeah, Melissa, when you said that this is ending not with a ticker tape parade, but with a conversation, you're exactly right. I mean, when I learned the news that Osama bin Laden was killed, I think most Americans had a very emotional reaction to that. I had a bookend, a very similar reaction to this morning, watching the president announce the end of the Iraq War. Between those two events over these past 6 months, the 9/11 era is over. And the 9/11 era is characterized by the radicalism of the George W. Bush administration that was in place when 9/11 happened. No one will ever be able to sell to the American people again the crackpot, cockamamie foreign policy idea of the Bush administration, which was that war could be something constructive, that war could be a creative force for reshaping the world in a positive way that was good for America. That was a radical faction neocon idea that got a hold of the Republican Party at the worst possible time, and it set us on a decade-long misadventure of making war for choice. That is over. There will never, ever be a group like that who is able to take hold in America, because now we know what happens when you do it. And that means that it's time to start talking about what we're going to be instead, because we're not going to be controlled by foreign policy radicalism. We're going to be pragmatic and realistic about it. And I think that President Obama is ideally suited to lead that discussion, but I hope that Republicans will participate in it too. It's time to have a big national, even partisan debate about how we use the biggest the biggest military the world has ever known.
Rachel, thank you for joining us as a guest on your own show tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for making time for me. You're doing an amazing job. Thank you for being there.
Well, I'm going to stay up late and watch you on Bill Maher on HBO a little later.
Thank you.
All these foreign policy victories for President Obama, truly remarkable, historic progress. But when he tries to get a badly, badly needed jobs bill through Congress, you'd think he was asking for the moon, the stars, and some comets to be named later. That's up next.